Okay, so this week we're doing Kings Kaleidoscope's first album, Becoming Who We Are. Came out in, what was it, fall 2014, like October, late October, around there. So I, Matthew, gave this album to Joseph and Jay. And for the last about week and a half, we've been listening to it, thinking about it. And let's see. This album coming out fall 2014. I don't think I listened to it until fall 2016, I guess, was then. So it was about 2 years after it came out. And I found the band because one of my friends in college, he looked through my albums and my playlists, and he just straight up told me, Matthew, you need better music. And so I said, okay, then what do I need to be listening to? He made a whole playlist with different albums and artists featured, and King's Kaleidoscope was one of the ones that was featured on there. So I found them through a friend, and I found I really love this album, Becoming Who We Are. And yeah, I remember listening to it and just thinking, whoa, like this doesn't sound like Christian music I know. The only Christian music I know is like worship music, I guess. That's what it all is, right? Like it's Chris Tomlin and Hillsong, or maybe it's gospel music or something. Like it fits in a category I understood. And when I heard this album, I was thinking, I don't have a category to put this in right now. And so the first time I heard it, I was just excited about it. And that was pretty sweet for me. But as I listened through the full album, it was my sophomore fall of college, I think. And yeah, it was pretty deeply impactful for me on many levels. The last album that I gave y'all that we talked about was Hillsongs of Dirt and Grace. And that was a live album that I listened to on repeat one summer. And it kind of set a foundational sort of framework for what was going on in my life spiritually. But a lot of that was like about God's love and about safety and about comfort and knowing that I'm held in God's hands, as we've talked about in previous podcasts. But this album was different. This album, one of the big things I took away from it was on songs like Felix Culpa, or even their version of How Deep the Father's Love, I really was thinking about my sin. And that was a stage in my life where I remember I was in a small group with a couple guys in my class in college, and it was a mess. All of us were a mess. And we were confessing sin all the time, which was good and productive, but also it was super messy, and there were lots of moments of anger and frustration and sin against one another, sin that just ate away at us that we had to confess. And it was on our minds all the time. And that was probably the first time in my life where I had a group of guys that were really serious about actually confessing to one another and repenting, confessing to the Lord and repenting to Him first and foremost, but taking that seriously and asking, like, what does it mean to recognize our sin and to confess it and to put ourselves before the Lord in a place where He changes our hearts actively. And so especially songs like Felix Culpa, which I showed you guys as the sort of intro to the album, were really impactful for me on a personal level. But then, as I said before, just beyond that, I like the music because I've listened to alternative music all throughout middle school and high school, and I really, really enjoyed stylistically and musically what was going on, and so that compelled me to listen to more of it. And King's Kaleidoscope as a band in the years since has become really one of my favorite bands, and something a lot more than just that album. Oh, it was great. Like right before graduation, right after my finals, my senior year of college, I got to finally see him in concert. And this was, 3.5 years later or so, I guess, after first listening to the first album. And one of my good friends and I got to go together. And it was cool because I feel like the story that their band has told is similar in some ways to some of the story I've felt in my walk with the Lord. And so their first album, and they've said this in interviews and stuff that I've read, they talked about it in their concert. Their first album was really them kind of creating a worship album. They're saying, we're going to worship the Lord, we're going to praise Him, but we're also going to test stuff out musically and see what we can do that maybe is different than the modern worship album. Chad Gardner and the guys in the band, they were, I'm pretty sure they were like worship leaders or something in their college up in the Seattle area or in Washington, and they were involved with a Mars Hill church plant. That was Mark Driscoll's whole church network, and this first album, it came out 2 weeks after Mark Driscoll resigned from Mars Hill Church, and that's a whole thing that we don't need to get into. But the first album is very worshipful. Their second album, which came out within a year or two after that, it deals with a lot more church hurt and like issues of anxiety and fear and worry. And there's a really controversial song on there called "A Prayer," which they curse in the album, which had the Christian music world all in a frenzy because they're like, "Can you do this? Is this allowed? I don't know." And so that was their second album. Their third album is called "The Beauty Between," and it was a lot shorter than their first two, and it featured a whole bunch of different Christian rappers. And it was 2017, and in the wake of a lot of just cultural turmoil and addressing a lot of just like racial issues and systemic issues in the country. And honestly, I listened to it recently, and it resonates with today. And their most recent album, Zeal, was from spring 2019, and they openly talked about how they didn't have a zeal for the Lord, and that they had gone through this whole journey of being frustrated with the church and frustrated with Christianity. And even though they had started with this album that we're talking about today, Becoming Who We Are, they found themselves in a place where they were just mad and frustrated and didn't have zeal for the Lord. And so they wanted to write an album that brought them to that place of zeal and brought them to that place of excitement to worship the Lord. And so I felt like through college, I walked with them in that as I listened to their albums. And yeah, I've loved them since then. But I would have to say that this album specifically was more of the first like bedrock for me listening to them of why they drew me in, why I thought it was worshipful. And I think that as you listen to it, you can definitely hear it lyrically. But what about you guys? You hadn't heard this album before. Jay, Joseph, how did you guys kind of take this album in? Was it impactful for you, or was it just sort of another album?
So I didn't have great expectations, musically speaking, because I was expecting it to kind of be like many of the other albums and songs that you guys have recommended, which I was just like, yeah, I can find some good in it. But I was pleasantly surprised with this album. It had a really like joyful feel to it that I really enjoyed. I shared with my wife. We had a group that we listened to whenever we lived in Peru. That was I don't know, kind of endemic of like what, just kind of example of like what we listened to there. You know how music sometimes attaches itself to experiences. And there was a group called Salvador, and they were a Spanish-speaking group, and everything was just so much fun. And like, so there was all kinds of instruments, and there was clapping, and it was just very, very exemplary of like Latin culture and how celebratory they are just in general. And whenever I listened to this album, first thing I think I stopped like 2 or 3 songs in and told Susan, I said, this sounds a lot like Salvador. And that's not really true. They don't sound musically that similar, but it gave off that same kind of vibe of, hey, there's something for us to be happy about. And which I think oftentimes in worship music, there's something, they almost kind of over-Christianize it. There's something for us to be happy about is, you know, that God loves us or whatever. But like this album was dealing with a little bit more depth in its issues. Like they dealt with sin, and the joy was coming from forgiveness and grace, not just kind of this bland, you know, I don't know, fake Christianese that oftentimes, at least I feel like I hear whenever I hear some of this monotonous worship music. Like this felt like a lot more heartfelt. I enjoyed it overall. I feel like that it was something that, like I said, it was an unexpected surprise. And because it was so fun, you know, Victory, my oldest daughter, who is now 12, she has a little iPod, and I said, hey, why don't you let me put this new song on your iPod, or this new album. And so I put it on, and me and the boys were working on their clubhouse, and she put it on her little Bluetooth speaker, and they were running around in the yard and listening and dancing and playing. And I'm sure she wasn't listening in depth to the words of the songs, but she was still getting that, hey, this is fun. This is fun music. And if kids enjoy it, and there's some level of joy in it, I think. And I feel like that's what kind of I was getting from them. So that's general thoughts of mine on the album.
I agree with Jay. I think that the album's exuberance is is emphasized. I think that when I first listened to it, it impacted me powerfully because it made me think of the excitement that this band has for God and for the worship of God, and the theme of nature resounding throughout, especially with some of the songs. I found that really impactful, and I had heard one of the songs on this album before, Grace Alone, and I was familiar with that song, but I wasn't familiar with the others. And so I find the excitement really attractive in this album.
I think it was kind of cool how they incorporated a couple of well-known hymns. Like it was Grace Alone, and what was the other one that they did?
How Deep.
How Deep, yeah. Both of which, like, it kind of, for those who are unfamiliar with their music, it draws you in because you're like, I don't know the artists, but I know this song, and I can sing along with this song, and I can resonate with it. And I feel like that How Deep, I was really pleased with it because it did have a very different take on it, and it really resonated with me. The All Creatures, I didn't love it. I mean, it's a cool song, and I've always liked it, but I didn't like it any better than any of the other versions I've had. But I felt like the version of How Deep was different. It resonated with me. I liked it a lot. So, yeah, overall, I think it's a cool album. It wasn't painful for me to listen to it 3 times. My first listen, like we normally do, I sat down and listened and read through the lyrics. The second and third listen, I was listening to it while I was working and doing other things. And I will say that in those listens, I didn't draw out as many of the lyrics as I did during that first listen. I definitely enjoyed it more during the first listen. It was like, I think that in the first listen, the lyrics came out at me the strongest, and the music was kind of background. But in the second and third listen, but I guess because I didn't know, the lyrics, I hadn't memorized them or anything, the music kind of stepped to the forefront, and the lyrics weren't as pronounced. But I still did enjoy it. I enjoyed both of them. And once again, I would say this is not really my style of music, but I did find it enjoyable. That was cool.
Yeah, sweet. I'm with you on that. For me, I think this album especially I really like it lyrically, and musically, I actually like some of their later albums more. But the fact that I've listened to the song so many times, if I hear a song, I know the lyrics, and so at this point, it's kind of hard for me to separate them. But I definitely feel that. What, I guess, lyrically or in general were some of those high points for you? Listening to the album for the first time. Like for me, Felix Culpa every time is one of my favorites. I absolutely love it. The bridge, I think about Romans 7 when I listen to the bridge, and just this sort of internal struggle that when we want to do what is good, evil is present with us, but in our hearts we delight in the Lord's instruction. This tension, this turmoil that we have, like that's what it reminds me of. I really like How Deep. I love that. But the other one actually that really always sticks out to me is 139, sort of their rendition of Psalm 139, or I guess it's inspired by that. But what about for y'all? Were there specific moments that really stuck out?
I think to kind of go along with what you said, I did like Felix Culpa. It's very Pauline. It was very kind of New Testament epistle type thing, and it did capture that inner struggle. Some of the lines that I really loved was the one that I liked the most was, "My sins are stories of grace to recall." And I just love the idea throughout the song of redemption and the spirit fighting the flesh. I think all of us resonate with that. Like any Christian who's actually trying to live out his faith recognizes that fight inside, and sometimes we lose, sometimes we win. Just the idea of breaking the chains of self-interest in our lives that we all struggle with and that we all kind of feel. And I think it was really bold for him to recognize that and not to just kind of gloss it over and sugarcoat it, but just say, hey, these are real struggles that we're having. I thought that song was great. I'm going to admit this on podcast as well as video if it's being taken, is in the song I Know, which I absolutely loved. I thought it was an amazing song. The first listen through, my eye leaked a little bit. I don't know exactly what happened, but it touched me enough that it moved my emotions enough that I shed a tear. I loved that song. It was very C.S. Lewisy. I felt like that theologically, the view of heaven in that is something that I've been longing to hear in Christian music, because so often our view of heaven for Christians in the modern times, it's all about us. It's all about, hey, streets of gold and all my crowns and all this. But the view of heaven in this song of I Know was all about Jesus. Like that was the focal point of everything. And I'm like, finally, somebody has a decent theological perspective on what heaven is supposed to be. And so I thought that was really awesome and unique and different and a really touching song. It resonated with me a lot. I've got others, but I'll let you go.
I agree about Felix Culpa. I think Felix Culpa is the most lyrically complex song on the album. And I agree with Jay. I Know is a really compelling song that I marked as well. I think that Felix Culpa is similar to like what Jay said. The talk of atonement, the talk of the sacrifice of the Lord, the crucifixion, the imagery that he uses is very physiological. And so it invites you into this, not gory, it's not a gory picture, but it is a serious and sustained picture of what the crucifixion is and what it means throughout the ages and what it means for our lives today. So I think that's why it's the most lyrically complex song. I really appreciate the songs I Know and Zion lyrically because they are so eschatological. And I love that image that they give, like Jay was saying just a few minutes ago, of longing, of waiting and yearning and pursuing the kingdom of God, not just here on the earth, but beyond. And the speaker is proclaiming, I know these things, this is true. I am conflicted. You see that same conflict in Felix Culpa. I'm conflicted because I want this. I know that I have it in part, but not yet fully. And I'm frustrated about that, but I'm also glad. And that's part of what it means to follow Christ on the earth.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. And I think that exactly what you just touched on is part of the reason why this album was so important for me in that season of my life. Because I was coming off of 10 weeks, my first time international. I was coming off of learning I actually loved reading the Bible for the first time in my life. But then I was just steeped in sin, stuff I was choosing, and socially, emotionally, physically, spiritually, you name it. Like, it was a mess of a semester in college. And I felt like Chad Gardner and the other guys in this band, that they were articulating something I felt. And I didn't know what to do with that other than just to listen to it and be like, yep, I get that. And then, but then that compared with I Know and with songs like Zion gave me this hope as I went through, because I wasn't just only listening to Felix Culpa and looking at the sin, and I was going through the whole song and like they say, see the God who raised on high, he has opened his own veins, from his wounds a rushing torrent that can wash it all away. There's this image of hope that is always there. Yeah. And that was really, really helpful for me as I was listening to those songs.
I think also the conversation that we've had since we've started this conversation amongst us, this podcast or whatever this is going to end up being, has been, what's the source of this? Is this that God was working in my life and he used this album to speak to me? It was kind of a generalized thing that God picked and used to speak to me, or was God using something in their life that overflowed in mine? And in learning more about the story and the song that you mentioned, Zion, and this lead singer, Chad, something, his son dying and all that, to me, it became very clear that the source of these things was God working in their lives. And so I feel like in this case, as with a couple of other albums we've looked at, it was an overflow. It was an overflow of God working in the band members' lives and the things that they were walking through that we were blessed with. Like the overflow has splashed out onto us and has impacted us as well. And I don't think honestly, I don't think there's a ton of albums that are like that. I think that those are rare. And I specifically feel like with the song that you mentioned with Zion, it wasn't one of my favorite songs on the album, but the story that goes along with it, I felt like kind of encompassed the rest of the album. Like these are the questions that came along with that struggle and that hardship. Some of the other ones that I liked, Fix My Eyes. I like all the Jesus-centric songs. Like, focus your song on the person of Jesus and you will have my attention. And I felt like, man, this one I have on my notes here is a lot of exclamation points. The imagery of Fix My Eyes reminded me of the first book that I remember reading as a child, which is Pilgrim's Progress. I read it with my mama. And as a little boy, it was such a cool adventure. And the idea and kind of the imagery that he brings along in this journey on Fix My Eyes took me back to that place and reminded me that I'm still on the same journey I was on whenever I was a young boy, is coming to know and understand who Christ was and how to walk in him. And like I'm still on that same journey. And so I really, really dug that song. It dealt with the struggles and the things that hinder us and how we can kind of, I don't know, I guess, process those and still keep moving forward. I thought it was a really cool song lyrically. I think it was awesome, brilliant. How Deep, which we've already mentioned once, just musically, I thought it was really unique because the whole rest of the song was real cheery. And, you know, there was one point where I'm going to say it was a little boy bandy. There was a chorus that I was like, okay, that's a little boy bandy. But everything was just really upbeat and cheery. And then whenever he started How Deep, I want to say it was piano and vocals. And it totally caught me off guard because I wasn't expecting it. So I think there were like 3 verses or something. And the first one was like that. It was just really raw. And you could feel the emotion in his voice. You could hear all the little details. And I always like music that's raw. The more overproduced it is, the less I enjoy it. So that just caught me. And then the second verse was a little bit more produced and had some of the same feel. But then on the third one, they went back to that raw feel. And I just thought it was a really unique take on How Deep. And so I thought that was another one of my big favorites. I know we're only supposed to have like a couple of high points, but I mean, the hymns, dadgummit, like, they get me every time. And I mean, these are songs, some of them that are, you know, at least decades and sometimes hundreds of years old, but yet still the songwriting of that time just seems to reach in and just grab you by the heart. Even though the language has changed, the sentiment it's universal and it's timeless. It's something that we've all felt and that that's inspired us all. And so you can't go wrong with that. Defender, I guess, is the last track. The percussion in that song was freaking amazing, and I loved it. And it just kind of drew me in to a different style of music that I wouldn't normally listen to because there was excellence in the way that they did it. You know, it wasn't just a bunch of guys playing. Like, these guys had worked on their craft, and it was very clear that they were doing it with excellence. And once again, what was the song about? It was about sin, and it was about Jesus. So once again, I loved it. I thought it was a very bold song. Everything about that song I loved. And I just thought it was I know those are high points, but I thought there were a lot of, and you know, that's high praise for me because I'm very judgmental of other generations' music, but I dug this album, and I do look forward to checking out some of their other stuff.
Yeah, and I agree with you completely. I think that in this case, God was doing something in the heart of the band. And for those of you that don't know the story, basically, Chad Gardner's son, Zion, he died while they were,
Stillborn, I think.
Yeah. While they were recording the album, or like right before it, and so the song Zion, I think part of the chorus is Zion, I'm coming soon to where you are. And so Joseph's completely right. Like, there is this heavenly imagery in there. But then when you know the heart, like wrenching backstory, it gives an even greater depth. And so it has these two aspects to it that I really respect artistically, first off, but then I think spiritually we can resonate with that. And so, yeah, things like that, I really, really appreciate that they're not afraid to put that kind of stuff into their album.
Yeah. Let me throw this in too. You know, I've had conversations with you guys in the past about how music has changed so much since whenever I came up. And like back in the day, whenever I came up, you would buy a cassette. You'd put that cassette in your Walkman, you'd put your little headphones on, and you'd open up the liner notes, and you would read every word in the liner notes. But you would also just soak in the pictures. You would soak everything in that was there. And I feel like that a lot of that is missed in this generation where we don't even really value. One of the reasons why I wanted to do this podcast is to help others to value a full album. And like in this case, I feel like it's necessary because you're getting the full album. You get the whole journey, not just one song plucked out of context. But also, one of the interesting things is I've kind of, once again, been judgmental about other generations. As I went on Genius to check out the lyrics while I was watching this, like there was all kinds of like backstory there. And I've never really used Genius until here recently. And like it would have a little highlighted section and it would tell you in that section like some notes about, like footnotes about why he used this phrase or this came from this passage or whatever. But even on the side, there were all kinds of videos and stuff. And so I feel like that there is an equivalent to what we did, you know, as young boys, opening it up and reading through everything. Like that equivalent is there. It hasn't completely disappeared as maybe some of us old Gen Xers think it has. It's just taken a different form.
Sure.
So it's really cool that you really could research and find out things like that in more depth. Because like reading liner notes, there's only so much you can get out of that. I mean, several of these videos, I probably watched 15 minutes of videos on, you know, this album. And that's much more information than I would just get out of liner notes.
Right. And what's cool about something like Genius is a lot of it is like crowdsourced. So you have fans that they've been watching interviews, they've been reading interviews, they go to concerts and hear someone say something, and that's all put in the notes on the lyrics as well. And so, yeah, I love Genius. And a lot of times on an album like this especially, I might not first round through be able to understand some of the lyrics, and so I need to read them. But yeah, culturally, it's not necessarily lost. It's been a shift, I guess, to the more digital sort of form of it.
Yeah, and to some degree expanded.
Yeah, potentially
like I said,
so.
I mean, it's much more than liner notes. Now, not every album has it. The other albums that we've done, none of those have had all the extensive information that I found in this album. So it's interesting. And I didn't know it was crowdsourced. So that's helpful.
Yeah, it has to be like approved and go through that whole thing. And it can be taken down. But even the artist can go in there and they can write very specific notes, and then it's verified and everything, which is pretty sweet. But
all right, well, let's hit the low notes.
Go for it.
Do you have any low notes, Joseph?
Yeah, I think that I find, except for Felix Culpa, I find this album lyrically shallow. I find the ideas...
that might be fighting words. Did you see him get all tensed up over there?
It's not that the ideas that they share are themselves shallow or not profitable. It's the formation of the lyrics. Poetically, I don't find it profound. I find Felix Culpa profound poetically, lyrically speaking. But the other songs, I found it very easy to listen to and absorb a message that is good and of God, but not profound, not complex, not thought-provoking. It was emotion-provoking, and it was thought-provoking a little bit in the way that it turned my thoughts towards God. And oh yes, he's speaking about the eschaton. He's speaking about the promise of God in nature, the glory of God in nature. But the exuberance kind of took up the energy, I think, of the lyrics of the album. So overall, I didn't find the album lyrically profound, but sometimes that's useful. Sometimes it's beneficial to have an album that is praising God and not necessarily complex, deeply complex.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I disagree, sure, but I think maybe part of the reason I disagree is because up to this point, I had only if it was Christian music I was listening to, it was going to be like your typical either like hymns, which I love. I think those are many of them are very complex lyrically and like articulate something wonderful. But like contemporary Christian music, that's like the same 7 or 8 words over and over again sometimes, you know. And
So
so
you're saying this is a step up from that?
for me, it was something
Yeah.
different, you know. It was not that I mean, the first album I gave again was Hillsongs of Dirt and Grace, and I still love that album. And so, but this was very different than that first one, lyrically and musically. And so maybe I found it to be more lyrically deep because of that difference, like juxtaposed.
I guess I didn't find it terribly shallow. In fact, I found it very Pauline, which I feel like Paul's writings are very, very profound. But I don't think that it was like theologically trying to make, these profound things. I think it was expressing profound feelings and thoughts that we have, struggles that we have, which are profound. Like the struggle against sin, no matter how many times it's sung about, if it's sung with a genuine heart and with words that express what we're going through, there's profound, feeling and emotion there. And so I didn't find it terribly shallow. I think, like the other albums, I've struggled with some of the perspective. So like, I think the song Ache and the song Dreams, I wrote in my notes here that both of them I would call them millennial anthems. And maybe I do mean that as a bit of a strike, and maybe that's not nice, but that whole thing we've talked about in other albums where it's like reminding me that I'm loved, reminding me that I have value. And so both of those songs, they just kind of went in one ear and out of the other because, once again, generationally, that's not my struggle. But that being said, I wouldn't completely discount them because I feel like that there is a generation that is one of their core struggles. I feel like that the millennial generation, that's something that they need to hear. And so I don't want to discount it. I just want to say that those songs, because of the generational difference, they didn't really impact me. And that's okay. And did either one of those songs have an impact on you, or is it just, does that make sense? Ache and
Sure.
Dreams.
So normally those wouldn't be in my top songs from the album. Ache sometimes will get stuck in my head a little bit, but it's so short. It's like 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes tops.
Yeah.
And so there's a couple of those on the album. I almost consider them little clips, you know. I could see their version of Psalm 139 potentially being in that category as well, which I really love that song. But I don't necessarily listen to this album because that's the message I'm looking to hear or be reminded of. And so, yeah, I get what you're saying. And we've talked about that a good bit before, just this generational shift of
It's just a shift of perspective.
It is, yeah.
And they're both valid perspectives. And I think that, regarding like the mentorship thing, it's an important thing for us to know about each other. It's important for us to realize that these are the struggles. Like whenever you and I began discussing these generational differences, like recognizing that identity is such a huge struggle for millennials. That was new to me, and as a mentor, it's something that I should know and understand and be able to help guide people through. I should be able to provide resources that help them in that struggle, And so I feel like I said, this is a low point for me. That doesn't mean it's a low point for everybody because some people may need to hear that. And you're saying you didn't need to hear it at that time, but somebody might.
Sure.
And so I don't want to poo-poo it, or make fun of it because I do feel like that it's a valid perspective. And as generations change and pass, they're going to have different things to pass on to others. And my generation is going to be inspired by another generation and something that they did, but other generations are going to be inspired by different things. And I think that's fine.
Yeah, sure. And I think, again, this touches on the deeper, like, sort of cultural question and even, like, how does this culturally resonate? It is fascinating that in the other albums we've done, at least from me and from Joseph, that's been a common theme, is this idea of security, comfort, safety, identity in Christ, ideas that all go in that vein. But overall, I didn't think that was the tone of this album nearly as much as some of those others. And so I'm curious.
I would agree with that.
I'm curious how you see it as sort of a cultural piece or what it does communicate overall. Where the other albums, it's very clear. Maybe the whole album you would call a millennial anthem, or whatever you want to call it. But where this one might be a little different, what would you say that this is
Yeah, I would say,
communicating?
like, culturally speaking, I feel like that this one, now you take the music out of it, because I will say, like, there's some really cool musical things here. Like, some of the percussion was really interesting and cool, and some of the intros and some of the songs or whatever. Now, that's not always going to be timeless. You know, like, disco is not timeless. You know, like, it was for a period of time. Some people may still hang on to it and really like it, but others hate it, you know. And so I think there's some things there that aren't timeless, but I feel like that the precepts that they were dealing with are timeless. This struggle against sin, I feel like that's why it resonated with me, even though it's not my kind of music per se. And so I feel like that it crossed, this album specifically, I feel like it crossed cultures whenever you're dealing with topics, whenever you're dealing with lyrics. These are the struggles of all people, and at least all Christians who are striving to walk in faith and to allow the Lord to sanctify them, and trying to adjust their behavior to something that resembles Christ. I feel like that it resonates with all of us in that. So I really didn't feel like that there were those huge differences outside of these two songs. And I didn't feel like the Psalms one, or 139, I didn't feel that way about it at all, because once again, it came from Scripture, and you know, that's a lot of generations back. But like I said, I feel like that it's helpful for me now. This is the third album that you guys have recommended to me, and every single one of them have addressed that topic of trying to be reminded that we are loved, and finding security in that, finding security in His love of us, or, you know, His purpose for us. And like I said, that's not what my generation really sought after. And so it's that recognition. Okay, this is a theme that I, as a mentor, need to be aware of. I don't need to ridicule it, even though, you know, we can play. But like, whenever it comes down to like real life, it's not something that I should tease millennials about, because it's a genuine need in their lives. And if I diminish that, then I diminish my ability to be able to speak into their lives and to mentor them through difficult times, or to help them to find the answers to those questions. So I feel like from the mentorship perspective and the cultural kind of significance, we have to be aware of the differences and not overly ridicule each other about the differences between our perspectives.
I think this album is relevant for its concept of praise, because like Jay was saying earlier, the need for the last 6 years since this album was released is more and more on the individual. And this album does speak of the individual, does talk about the individual and to the individual, but there are songs in this album that talk more clearly to God and talk about God, and they talk about the actions that God has taken in the world, the glory of God, I think just of this first song, Glorious, and then the eschatological songs that we already talked about, the All Creatures song by St. Francis of Assisi, that speaks to the praise of God, the same with Psalm 149, that song 139.
Yeah, it's almost like they're recognizing an individual in the midst of much larger schemes in life.
Yeah.
Where I feel like that oftentimes in modern worship music, it's like, look at me. It's like, help me, bring me the things that I want, bless me. But I feel like, as kind of as you're describing, like, this is saying, here I am in the midst of all of this craziness going on in the world around us. And it's recognizing the individual nature of our relationship with God, but it's also recognizing we can't fix any of this stuff. Like, this is bigger than us, and recognizing God's place in that. I definitely felt that in this album for sure.
Yeah, the glory of God I can see very clearly in this song, this album, in these songs. The songs display that relevance because I think our generation needs to hear songs like this. I think our generation needs to get out of our own heads. And I think we need to step into the glory of God, the supremacy of God, and to see what it means to be in awe of God, to see what it means to revere God, to worship God, and not always think even about God and me, God and I, God is loving me, God is doing these things for me. But we need to think more about who God is in himself. And then if we do think about humanity, which we will eventually, as Jay says, we need to affirm the collective church. We need to affirm the community of the church, because in North America, that is diminishing throughout our entire culture. And it's got terrible effect.
Yeah, and I also think that this kind of individual thing that we kind of discussed, like that's been an epidemic amongst the church, basically us and God. And I think that the interesting thing that they bring to this is context, which is, I think, really demonstrated in the song Zion, where somebody else writes a song about their son dying, and it's probably going to be about them. You know what I'm saying? But it seemed like there was really no complaining. There was no "woe was me," which would be merited. You know, these are really hard things to pass through. But the way that he dealt with it, I felt like was very, very helpful for everybody, but specifically for these couple of generations that have been kind of self-focused and self-centered in their theology. And I feel like that the perspective that King's Kaleidoscope gave in this song was something that was a lot more biblical in the way that we should respond whenever hardships come. It was hope. And I don't know when this podcast will come out, but right now we're smack in the middle of all this racial tension in the U.S., and it just doesn't seem like there are any answers. And I feel like that whenever hardships like this come, sometimes that's how you feel. There's this desperation. There are no answers. I don't know what to do. I can't do anything. It's too big. It's bigger than I can do. And what I think we find in Scripture, and what I think we find in this song, Zion, is all we can do is hope. We can really place our hope there. We can do everything we possibly can, but the worst thing we could do is lose hope. And I will be honest, like with all the crazy stuff going on in the world, it's hard sometimes not to just put your head in your hands and say, there ain't no hope for this. There ain't no way out of this. But I find several songs in this complex enough to deal with the difficulties and hardships in the world around us while still maintaining hope and saying, we can't do it, but we know that he's in control, and we know that he has a purpose for this.
Yeah, I agree with you all completely. I think maybe at the time I didn't realize it, but thinking about it now, to kind of wrap it back around to my experience with the album, even as my buddies and I were confessing sin and we were trying to seek the Lord and figure out what does it mean to walk in the light as children of the light, what does this mean? It was still super self-centered. It was confession, but it wasn't upward looking and upward moving. And listening to this album in that season, I think in the back of my mind, there are these ideas of hope that keep getting put in my mind. And even the song "Fix My Eyes," we talked about it earlier. It's exactly what the song title is: "Fix your eyes on who? On Christ." And I don't remember exactly if they use the words author and perfecter or founder and finisher. If they do it a couple different ways, a couple different times, there's different ways to translate that from, what is it, Hebrews, right? And but that was in the back of my mind all the time, and it stood out. It was different. And I think you're right. I think culturally we need to hear that. I know I need to hear that. That is super relevant right now, because I think it's relevant because it's not resonant. Like, it's not something that we're really doing, because so often the ideas are about me, about I in the middle of this, and we forget sometimes the huge system. And I love that they kind of are able to place very true and heartfelt moments of lamenting in the midst of something bigger. Because otherwise it's just kind of turns into like some sort of whirlpool of dread and despair and sadness, because we're not looking up, we're not fixing our eyes up. And especially now when, I mean, we're on what? We're in month 4 of COVID lockdown at this point. And we're away from home. There's huge racial tension and issues in America right now. And it seems like things just keep getting added on top and on top. And it'd be really easy to just turn to despair. But what is the framework in which we're going to choose to look at things? I think that's super relevant for today. And so their other albums also touch on that a little bit. And lyrically, maybe Joseph, you would like those a little bit more. But this one still, for me, it touches something deep. And every time I go back to it, I love it. So Jay, you talked a little bit on mentorship and like what listening to this album helps you understand as far as a mentorship relationship goes. What from receiving this album, I guess both of you guys, not just Jay, because you did mention that, in the realm of mentorship, yes, have you learned about millennials and stuff like that, but I guess personally, if that makes any sense.
I mean, as I shared before, I feel like that there are some cultural things to learn, and once again, a lot of times it comes in patterns. So I feel like that there are some patterns that are starting to develop as I hear some of your music, themes that are relevant that I need to be aware of as a mentor for you guys, and for others that are in your same age range. I think it also demonstrates some of the blind spots that I have, and areas that I have to be able to check myself to, and so there's that. I think honestly, a lot of this is music too, just like checking out the music and like, it's very different. And as we discussed, I think with the Stavesacre album, like our music is very kind of rebellious and going against the grain and fighting the man kind of thing. And, trying to find how you guys do that, or if you do it, I guess culturally speaking, there's kind of that rebellious evangelist that I'm wanting to say, come on guys, get pissed off and do something, like that's, but I'm holding back in that to try and say, okay, is that necessary? Like, or is this where God wants them to be? And because every generation is different, and I think every generation is different in the eyes of the Lord. I think that He has different responsibilities for each one of us to do, different things that He has for us to do, and impact that He has for us to have in the world around us. And so I'm trying not to judge. I'm trying not to project my culture and my generation's responsibilities onto you unless I feel like it's relevant. And there may be some relevant things that I feel like I need to pass on, but I feel like that we're still pretty early in the albums and for me to see those patterns. But yeah, I don't know, does that help?
Yeah, for sure. You have any thoughts on that, Joseph? Mentorship? Cool. Okay. Well, if you like this album, or I guess if you're interested in listening to more by Kings Kaleidoscope, honestly, I recommend all 3 of the other albums they've come out with. As a whole, I love them all. Jay, you said you love their version of some hymns. They've actually got an EP. I think they called it Asaph's Arrows, and it's like 4 or 5 hymns. Their versions of hymns, I think. A version of like Jesus Paid It All, maybe Come Thou Fount, a couple others.
Cool.
Yeah, those are pretty good. I would highly recommend right now The Beauty Between, which is it's a shorter album, still a full album, features several different Christian rappers, and I think it speaks even more so like into the current cultural moment. And then if for no other reason than the controversy surrounding the song, you should check out A Prayer, which is the explicit song on their second album, Beyond Control.
Did it actually get a little E on it? Like
So there's I saw 2 versions on Spotify. There was one that it's not there, and there's another that it is there. And so I don't know what that's about.
Is that all it takes now to get an E is one curse word?
I guess. I don't know. But yeah, people were all up in arms about it. So if you want to listen to that controversy and weigh in on it, definitely go check that out. But the album as a whole is really good too. And for context, even that song, Chad basically said he pulled it like right out of his journal when he was really emotional and angry and didn't know what to do other than to cry out to the Lord with those same words. So I really love the rest of their music. So I recommend y'all check them out too.
So I think it'd be really interesting. I don't know what platform this is going to be on, if this is going to be on YouTube or Apple Podcast or Spotify. But if there is an avenue for you to write some type of comments or questions or whatever, I think it'd be really cool to hear from you guys. If you've heard these albums, what your thoughts are. Do they mirror ours? Do you have different perspectives than we have? Or is this something that is a new album to you, a new sound, a new perspective? It'd be really interesting to hear from those who are listening to us and check out their perspective.